Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Excited about today's show, folks. We're going to go on a little bit of a different trip today. We've talked before in the past about aliens, alien abduction, and the trauma that comes with alien abduction. I want to revisit this topic today with a special guest. This topic fascinates me, and I'll tell you why. I continue to come back to this topic because I have had experiences with, we'll say ghosts. I'll put it that way. I don't know that I've ever had an experience with the demonic, although I've had something strange happen with an ovulus that has told me that a demon's been nearby. I've smelled things that may have potentially been demonic, but I've never had anything manifest in front of me. I don't know that I've had anything cryptid come across me in the woods, although I've had strange things happen out in the woods. Aliens are something that I've never encountered firsthand, although I've seen something in the sky that's been unusual. And I don't know that I can explain it as something alien, but a strange light in the sky. An alien abduction to me seems unusual. And it fascinates me when people tell me that they've had this experience. I don't discount it at all, but I find it fascinating. So let's get into our guest today. We'll talk a little bit about what these particular abductees go through and how we know it's a genuine experience from someone who may potentially have a mental illness or may potentially have something where I don't want to say they wish this particular horrifying experience happens, but maybe there's a cry for help here. Our guest, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, is a Toronto-based certified clinical hypnotherapist who specializes in a number of modalities, including working with individuals who feel that they have had experiences with extraterrestrial beings. Most of this fascinating work, as well as metaphysical therapies such as past life and her life regression, takes place at Lesley's Toronto hypnosis clinic, Lightwork Hypnosis. Prior to her work in hypnotherapy, Lesley also has had a busy career as an actor, dancer, and vocalist. And for the past 20 years, she's also been a top jazz and media consultant with an array of Grammy and Juno-winning clients, as well as major jazz festivals and record labels. Lesley is currently the director of LMC Media, with offices in both Toronto and Lesley's hometown of New York City. She's also a busy arts writer, contributing regularly to a variety of publications. Let's welcome into Darkness Radio, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke. Hi, Lesley. Welcome in.
It is so good to be here, and I feel absolutely exhausted after that introduction.
Oh, no reason to.
I'm going to have to trim that down. But
it's a good intro. I like it. It's,
well,
I always have admiration for someone who's stuck it out and had a career in arts before they get to another career, because you've been through the ringer.
oh boy. Well, it was actually the family business. My late dad was a multiple Emmy-winning comedy writer and television producer, and he worked with Norman Lear for many years and produced
wow.
All in the Family and Good Times and The Jeffersons, and he created Mork and Mindy for Robin Williams, and
Hey.
had an Emmy for Mary Tyler Moore. I think all the really cool shows of the day he worked on, and he began his career writing for Get Smart.
Wow. You just named
My
like all
dad,
my favorite shows.
oh boy, they were great. But I tell you, the funnier my dad got on screen, the more unfunny he was at home.
Oh, no.
It wasn't like a big acceleration of humor. I think it just took all he had, You know how working in television is, 14, 16 hours a day, whatever it takes, right?
Right.
So,
I,
God
I
bless
hate
him
to,
anyways.
I hate to ask the question. Is that why there's the crossover to therapy, or is this the,
Well, I have always been interested equally in the arts and mental health care. And even as a young teenager, I was volunteering at the state hospital. And when I was a university student, not here in Minneapolis, but in Vermillion, South Dakota, where I finished school, I put myself through school working on the graveyard shift as first a psychiatric aide, then a psychiatric technician. So I saw, mental, because I am really, really bloody old. I mean, dinosaurs were roaming the earth when I was conceived. But anyway, I saw mental health care really in what we would consider a very primitive state now. Now we would view it that way, but because before we had psychotropic drugs which could curtail violent impulses, things like Thorazine, um, there was there were very few options in managing someone in a violent psychotic state. We had padded rooms, we had straitjackets. I mean, we had tubs of warm water. We would put them. It was incredibly primitive by today's standards. So, psychotropic medications, flawed though they may be, um, have prevented a lot of more horrible things because I've seen them. I wouldn't want to go backwards. That's for sure.
Just a
So,
sidebar here, side note. What do you think about ketamine therapy and how it's used in the psychological field?
oh, well, interestingly enough, now my mind is open, and I know a lot of times it's a question of dosage or whatever it is, but I have in just my straight ahead hypnotherapy work, and I work as a consultant for a psychology firm, so I'm quite busy with straight ahead stuff. I have seen it have miraculous results for depression.
mhm.
So apparently, with a fairly high percentage of people, whatever this whatever this chemical does, it must somehow stimulate endorphin production or dopamine production. I'm not quite sure how it works, but I also have several friends who have had amazing success also with microdosing um, LSD. Now, all that, I mean, back in the day, I certainly wasn't afraid to experience some supplements like that. I did, but the idea of being that high now is very scary to me. But of course, I guess microdose is it's not dosing microdot. That's something else.
Right.
But a microdose, I imagine it's so controlled that um, you're not even aware in your conscious mind of your perceptions being altered.
Yeah.
I'm open to it. I've all I can say is I've heard nothing negative from anyone who's tried it, and I had expected maybe I would. I've heard nothing negative thus far, except one person who was apparently resistant to the ketamine treatment. She tried it and did it extended times, and it just for her didn't work for whatever reason.
I've seen with some friends and some loved ones that have had depression issues and some mental health issues that have used ketamine. They've had some
Hmm.
great success with it in small doses. I bring
Yeah.
this up because of the recent Matthew Perry issue
Oh
and
dear.
overdose, and it's a high
Uh,
profile issue where people who have issues with addiction tend to want to get a hold of it and want to get a hold of it in higher quantities once it's prescribed to them. Um, and
yes.
that's the only downside to it is it is highly addictive. Um, and I guess I'll throw this in and
It's true.
yeah, and the other side of it where you'd mentioned psilocybin, and using it with say people with PTSD and extreme PTSD, where microdosing
Hmm.
psilocybin
Hmm.
has been shown to potentially
Hmm.
clear up PTSD. Now, I want to bring this back around to our subject today, where we're talking about alien abduction or even past life regressions that are people who've had trauma from both. Um, where potentially microdosing psilocybin could be, could it work hand in hand with talk therapy and other hypnotherapy and other treatments? Could that be a way to help?
Oh, it does. It does work. Absolutely. In fact, I would say that a doctor will probably only prescribe or authorize a ketamine or microdosing course of medicine if there is also therapy involved. So that's a very important cog. And now we also have some amazing techniques for dealing with trauma and the release of traumatic events. You may have heard of EMDR,
Yes.
and it involves movement of the eyes, and stimulating the different sides of the brain. That is an earth-shakingly powerful treatment.
Yeah.
So there are things that are come on the horizon that are going to be very, very different from the kinds of medicines that we've used. I have a feeling that SSRIs, antidepressants as we know them, are going to be replaced by more effective treatments. Because remember, I think it's what is it up as high as 70%? At least half the people that are on SSRI or SNRIs are getting no relief from
Gosh.
the medicine.
That's
Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have it because half the people are, but the question is why? Why? So these questions are we're living in the era of the real-time mapping of the brain,
mhm.
which will allow us to discover the answers to some of these things that have been, mystifying. But there are many interesting techniques coming up on the horizon. Now, one thing I wanted to say about trauma, though, is that I was part of as a hypnotherapist, as a master hypnotherapist, regressionist. I was vetted to be a mental health care professional as part of Kathleen Marden's experiencer research program, which was handled under the auspices of MUFON.
Okay.
And it was a 10-year long program, Tim, 10 years. And during that time, I saw or many people who were referred to me by MUFON. Now, of course, by the time they got to me, I think probably most people with mental health issues had already been weeded out because they have investigators with boots on in the field,
Yes.
and they um, are trained to, kind of look for that kind of thing. But the results of the testing, I mean, the research program rather, were that only maybe 20% of the experiences that all of the people reported and et cetera, were traumatic or upsetting or disturbing. 30% were what I would call ecstatic experiences, like a big spiritual uplift, if you will.
Hmm.
And the rest were just benign. So the reality here is we don't really have thousands and thousands and millions of people who have been traumatized by the ETs. What we have is real-time communication going on that is sometimes misunderstood. It's a very complex issue. Some of the experiences that people have are physical. In other words, their bodies are, taken somewhere else, most often in a craft, but it could be through some type of wormhole or, interdimensional door as well. There's all of that going on as well. And we those people are often when they do begin to have memories bleed through, it's usually around midlife. Now, I think the idea of suppressing our memories is not evil. I think it has been the idea that this is going to be more healthful for us. But I also think that the ETs have developed, and I'm speaking of many groups
Okay.
of species and beings. I think that they have, as a unified organization, a Gene Roddenberry like, unified organization. I think that they have discovered a lot more about their genetic cousins, us, and that we are very curious people, and it is unhealthy for us to suppress memories and compartmentalize them in the way that it has been artificially done, both by ETs and I would say by government organizations as well. We can't rule that out. So, but most of the people had very benign experiences. As I said, some of them were in what you would call astral bodies. They weren't physically taken. And what I found most particularly is childhood experiencers, and I believe that almost all experiencers began having these episodes in childhood. I don't think it's something that just pops, just happens when you're 30 or 40 or whatever. No, I think it's an ongoing thing. And many of these individuals have have had, how shall I put it, even emotional relationships with some of the beings that are engaging with them. And
Okay.
it begins when they're small, and they're often taken to have learning experiences on board a large mothership, if you will. I mean, these are the things that I'm hearing. I should make that, I always have a skeptical eye. I'm simply telling you the kinds of things that I'm hearing from very credible people. And remember, experiencers, it's not like it's those, some old crap, you can't even say that. Some people from down south are like one tooth, some hillbillies, or it's not that.
Okay.
Experiencers cross all levels of ethnicity, all levels of faith, all levels of education, all levels of social status. I have had judges, and probably though the group um, of people that statistically, according to my little situation, um, teachers. I have more teachers
Really?
than probably anything else, any other profession. Why that is, I can't tell you, but it makes sense to me somehow. So there you go. But people of all temperaments and styles. Now, you asked me earlier a little. Oh, go ahead,
Well, I
Tim.
was going to
Sorry.
teachers. Would that be because of the temperament? Is it because they're more understanding? Is it because they're able to communicate better? Why do you suppose teachers?
I think because one of the things that I believe the ETs, as in all of their diversity, I believe they are seeking psychic ability because it makes it easier for them to communicate. It makes it easier for them to do what they do as far as transporting people or working with them in the astral state. It makes everything easier. So I would say that teachers as a group, the good ones, the inspired teachers, probably all have pretty psychic ability. They're probably all able to tune into their students. I remember, there's some teachers in school you couldn't get away with anything. And I think, my God, she must be reading reading my mind as
Yeah.
I'm trying to sneak off to the girls' bathroom for a smoke. I mean, I think psychic ability is the thing that they're looking for, and I think it runs very high in people in the teaching profession, or the kind of people that are open enough to come see me. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with an open person usually. Um, but
So
as I said earlier, most people do come to me in midlife because they are beginning to have you know breakthroughs like flashes, and that's just a sign that any kind of memory block or suppression is dissolving. I don't think they can last more than 20 years myself. I don't believe that that technology exists with either ETs or humans.
okay, so there's a bit of a creep factor here, though, Lesley. So what you're describing is a grooming process because you're telling me at my age, in middle age, that if I haven't had an experience by now, I'm probably never ever going to have an experience where I'm going to be abducted. Um, the chances are slim because I would have had to have been taken at a young age, and I probably would have had to have been probably groomed, and I would have had to have been warmed up, so to speak, to the idea that I was going to have multiple encounters with these beings and warmed up to it. And then
Mm-hmm.
something was going to, I mean, there's a process here, and obviously there's a process, and that they have an agenda, right?
Well, let's look at it as more of a collaborative thing. I think that in the interlife, when we get ready to come into this physical body, like after your most recent incarnation, and you're preparing to either come back to the earthly realm or not, I think that many of those relationships, these long-term relationships that people have with ETs and the work that they're doing in their etheric body, I think much of that is put in place before the person arrives in physical form, because we are all moving towards, the I mean, people are moving towards awareness. They are moving towards awareness, and it doesn't take all the people on the planet to be aware to bring about change. We only need about half the people to become aware that we have an interdependent universe. And right now, I think a lot of the ETs see us as like 3-year-olds toddling around with a flamethrower. I think that the nuclear weapons have the possibility to rip space and time, and that's very frightening. Otherwise, why would we regularly have so many instances of like fleets of what is it they call now, uh, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, buzzing over nuclear um, uh, silos and turning them off.
Yeah.
I mean, we that happens. It happened in Russia. It's happened so many times. I can't even count, and many times in the American Midwest, and also in what we call the dew line. Now, are you familiar with that term, the dew line?
I have heard it. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. What it is there are a series. This is a Cold War era installation. There are a series of military bases, nuclear armed military bases that are run by Canada and the United States, that runs along a very northern part of Canada. The idea was that, so if we thought the Russians were lobbing something over at us, we could get them first.
Hmm.
So that was the thinking behind the dew line. But there's also a lot of very specialized military activity going on out there. They don't exactly have a lot of eyes on them at any given time. And many of the experiencers that I have worked with are from military families where the father was stationed in one or more of the bases in the dew line. And those young people were, as you say, groomed is a very creepy word, but they were drawn in um, as cadets into some type of a program that involved both a specific group of ETs and the American international armed forces. So there is a creepy element, but I have to tell you, the creepiest stuff that I hear about, the worst, creepiest, most awful stuff I hear always involves a human component.
Okay. Uh, Lesley, I have to ask this question before we go too far here, and bear with me here. You brought up an interesting point, and that's this. Recently, I like to go down rabbit holes when I'm, especially in the morning as I'm having my morning coffee.
Mhm.
And a lot of times I'll get caught up in Apple News and I'll start looking at different interviews. One of the interviews I saw recently,
Mhm.
and I like to go down both sides of the political spectrum. I know we're not a political show, but I like to, especially with the upcoming election, I like to take a look at all candidates, all sides of the political spectrum. I was looking at candidate Trump's one of his interviews because he's doing very few of them. And I caught one of his podcast interviews. I wanted to check out one of his podcast interviews. Interestingly enough, he was asked the question, what is the
Oh.
number one threat in the world today? And he said it was nuclear weapons. And then this is where I'm getting around to now. I want to bring it back to our subject today. He said,
Mhm.
and he let out a valuable piece of information, that there are 5 countries right now, other than the US, Russia, and China, that are not just on the verge of having a nuclear weapon, they're essentially armed. Now, again, you're talking about a guy
Yeah.
who, uh, we can all argue it had secrets in his bathroom, right? But five countries that have these secrets. Now, you could argue that with what you just said, that there are these aliens that are looking out for us. We're like 3-year-olds with a flamethrower in our hand. Well, there's more 3-year-olds running around with
Mhm.
flamethrowers in their hands,
Excuse me.
and they're huge ones at that, right? Um,
Yeah.
and the fact that he came out and he even said, "I'm deeply disturbed by it." The fact that there are these 5 new countries, and he named them, that have these. And he then went on to say, and I don't know whether you believe him or not, that at one point during his term, they had a deal on the table to de-escalate all nuclear weapons between Russia, China, and the US and get them off the table because they were too dangerous. It was just too much. Again, take it for what you want. I think at that point, I'll ask you 2 questions. This is a double-headed question here. Do you believe in your heart of hearts that we ever get to a point where we put down the nuclear weapons and these beings say, you've done good, we back off, but we'll, and we'll keep an eye on you from afar? And 2, would it ever be possible that we could do that? Because everybody wants power. So as long as the technology in Pandora's box has been opened, it's out there, right? Somebody's going to want the power.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Well, I think that there will be something that will unify us to such a point that these things will happen. And I also think that the nuclear period, phase, experimentation, I think just about every civilization, even in our galaxy, has passed through a dangerous nuclear age. Because if the knowledge comes before maturity, it's going to be a horror show. So I think that the beings that are visiting us and attempting to help us without telling us what to do or controlling things, I think they do believe in a time where that will happen because it is going to be necessary. They can't risk how dangerous we are right now. It's a very critical time. We have really, 2 roads, but I think that we're ready. I think disclosure has been a grassroots movement. I think that the 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 people of our planet can handle a lot of things way better than anyone thinks that we can. And I also think that not being alone in the universe, being all from some central creative force somehow, I think these things can happen because they have happened on other planets with bipedal humanoids, or they wouldn't be where they are, looking at us, trying to help. But the great Stanton Friedman, God bless him, he once told me, and I thought this was such a astute statement. He said, once a civilization understands how their sun works, they're going to figure out nuclear power.
Yeah.
So it is also probably part of a natural process. So yes, I'm a glass half full person, and it's been very difficult for me to see my home country sliding backwards into ignorance and racism and other things that I thought were done. You know, I thought we took care of that stuff in the late 60s and the 70s, and to have to see these book burnings, and I mean it's surreal, but it is also a cry for help, because if we don't redistribute wealth and end poverty and make education feasible and wonderful and possible for everyone, you know, we should just kiss it goodbye now, because we have social problems that begin in the womb, and it has to do with largely with education and nutrition. And you may laugh at me by saying that, but that is a big part of brain development. There are children in the United States that are living in starvation levels in our own country. So, can you imagine what a wonderful impact free energy could have? And I believe that that technology exists and has existed since the dawn of time, and the ancient Egyptians knew how to use it by drawing energy right out of the earth itself. Tesla knew how to use it. Can you imagine? That would create thousands of more jobs. People's living expenses would be infinitesimal compared to what they are now.
Well, they announced
And
at
so
the
there could be a clean ecological future.
they announced at the beginning of the year that they figured out how to power an entire city with laser fusion, but that they wouldn't have the
Yeah,
technology and how to do it for 10
yeah,
years. Which I don't buy. I don't buy that
bullshit.
you
It's
know they
Yeah,
can't put that online
bullshit,
in years.
bullshit.
They could figure out how to do solar in a matter of just
No,
a few years. Um, but that
yeah,
you can't come up with laser fusion for 10 years. Come on. Yeah, it doesn't
that's ridiculous. Now this technology exists. It exists, and so there are things like this that could be so profound for our civilization, because we have to feed our people. And also, and this is not really a political statement, it's really not, it's about balance. Until we have a balance between male and female, and that, I don't care how people identify, that's not what I'm saying, it's not what I mean, female energies and male energies. We have been living in a patrilineal civilization with men and their testosterone and their anger and all of that stuff. Now, I'm not saying that all men are like that, but I think politics can attract those kinds of people because it's a type of show business. And megalomania runs rampant on both sides of the question. So that's, I'm not making this political, but I think with the balance like they're starting to have in Europe of female major executives, premiers, presidents, I think the female energy is going to save the world. That's what I think.
fair enough. Fair enough. Um, let's get back to the topic at hand here. Let's talk a little bit about
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about the ET babysitting the world, so to speak. I have
Mm-hmm.
talked about
Mm-hmm.
the the amount of positive versus negative experiences. I want to focus on why is it that we hear about the negative, not
Hmm.
so much the positive. Why is it that I hear more about people having negative experiences, the probing, the pain, the implants, than I do, well, we
Hmm.
got
Hmm.
together, we had a nice time, love and light and all that. I don't hear a lot of that. I hear a lot of, I've got this implant inside of me. I don't know
Okay.
what it is. Lost time.
Right. Well, it makes good copy. It makes good copy. It makes television.
Mhm.
But, let me just go back in time a little bit here to the end of World War II, right? And the Roswell crash. Well, first of all, I believe there were three vehicles with bodies and some alive that crashed that day. We were using some type of sonic weapon that they weren't prepared for that brought them down, some type of anti-gravity sonic weapon of some sort. And there were survivors. And these beings were from they were Zeta Reticulates. They were from a binary star system. In other words, they're the same beings, what you would call the Greys, the same beings who visited Betty and who abducted Betty and Barney Hill. That's the same beings. They have been involved with us for millennia, and way back into pre-unrecorded history. At any rate, at the time of this crash and the capturing of the technology and the craft and the bodies, the beings offered to make a deal, and they call this, initially it's called the Truman Agreement because Truman was president in this post-war time. So the deal was that the Zeta Reticulates would give us technology that we could manage, but that wouldn't, disrupt our monetary system, blah, blah, blah. And in exchange, they were having a genetic crisis. They could no longer reproduce. They needed help. We have some DNA in common that we share. So they wanted permission to simply take some DNA from a very few random citizens. Well, we got the technology, which of course is things like that came up overnight, integrated circuits, fiber optics, Velcro. we got,
Velcro? Really?
we got all of that stuff.
Huh.
And yeah,
I guess you got to get something out of it, right?
and but this good grief, but this abduction and painful extraction of DNA and all this kind of stuff was out of control and was becoming almost like a commonplace experience. God knows how many people they involved in their fertility program. And I have had experiencer clients that have told me about having hybrid children brought to them. And, I've heard, I have horrible stories about, painful extraction of ova and sperm and using psionic techniques to confuse and muddle you. So you think that you're with a physical person, but you're not. I mean, I've heard some stuff that is so far out, but it was all about getting those that ova and those sperm and doing some kind of regeneration of their fertility program. Anyway, that agreement, which was later called the Eisenhower Agreement, that agreement timed out, and the Zeta Reticulites kept their word about what the agreed time was. My personal guess is that it's in the early 90s sometime, early to mid 90s, because I don't really hear about those types of things occurring after that, right?
Okay.
So I think that's what happened. So those experiences that you're talking about are real. They happened. But what I can say is the people to which they happened are very much senior people at this point in history. They would be 70, 80 years old.
Okay. So you're saying that that type of rampant impregnation, for lack of a better term,
Mhm.
isn't happening anymore.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
No, that kind of thing is done. What we have now are more like people working together on projects that are kind of mysterious, and we do have people having examinations, but they're not involving pain. It can, and we do have implants, but they are etheric implants. And it's kind of a different situation than the kinds of implants that Dr. Lear examined so thoroughly back in the day. So, the kinds of beings that are engaging with us that I hear about the most, and believe me, there are all kinds of beings. There are aquatic beings. I mean, there are all kinds of beings, but we are apparently very closely related genetically to any beings from the Lyran system, which means like Pleiadians and Arcturians, I think. And if there is, in fact, a planet called Nibiru that has that large elliptical orbit, and those beings did come to our planet, they are also in the Lyran system. So we're related, we would share DNA. So many of the encounters are with what I would call humanoid. I mean, not shocking, but humanoid beings. I think the Arcturians are a multi-race people, but they tend to have bluish skin. Their blood system operates on copper, not on iron. So there are those Lyrans, and the Pleiadians, or what you would call the tall Nordics. They are engaging. So there aren't too many uh, beings that are terrifying, or these beings are able to make themselves seem um, uh, humanoid-like. I don't have the answer to that question, but I tend to think that there is a kind of a pattern for beings, bipedal beings, that is quite common in the universe, would be my thinking, but of course I'm not sure. There are reptilian beings, but they are not necessarily all bad by any means. In fact, one of my clients, who gave me an awful lot of information, said that certain groups of the reptilians are known as the galaxy's top geneticists. So they're often involved in processes. So there are, I think, like anything else, there are good guys and bad guys, just like on our planet. And our planet is a grand experiment. We're told that it's unique in that there are so many beings at different stages of development within one world, and it seems that is rather a rarity in our corner of the galaxy.
Okay. Tell you what, we're behind in our break. Let's take our break. When we come back, I want to ask you, have you run across anybody who's maybe a product of one of these unions? Have they come to you and asked, who am I? What am I? And why am I here? We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about some of the other
Mhm.
things you might have run across in your practice as well. Lesley Mitchell-Clarke is our guest. She's a skilled hypnotherapist who specializes in regression, and we'll talk more about aliens, and we might even have time to get into some past life stuff as well. When we come back right here on the Best in Paranormal Podcasting, this is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Our guest is Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, and we are talking about, well, we're talking about all things alien. We're talking about alien abductions. We're talking about aliens in general. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about, uh, we're going to talk about in this segment what happens when uh, these particular beings reproduce. And let's talk about the progeny of these beings, Lesley. And
Okay.
I want to know, in your practice, if you've ever come across the progeny of these beings, these alien human hybrids. And if you've ever had an alien human hybrid come to you and say, you know what, I feel like I'm different. And can you tell me? I think I've had an experience with
Mhm.
maybe an alien parent, and
Mhm.
but I don't remember it. Can you actually take me back and tell me who I am, where I come from? And I think I have had experiences, but I don't remember. Can you help me remember?
Yeah. Well, that would be a fairly common thing, because people who are having these experiences often dream of another planet. They often don't feel like they totally belong here. They have those sorts of sensations. Now, I have never seen any of these clients um, have what I would call overtly ET or unusual features. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't be carrying very special DNA. I mean, um, I have also had um, um, people tell me that their DNA was enhanced in the womb after their mother had already conceived them, which also is an interesting point of view. But these things were not this enhancement um, kind of thing is something that I have often heard about.
Hmm.
So I think the whole question of hybridization is that we have been visited and involved with ETs really since the dawn of time. I mean, all we have to do is look at, petroglyphs, like, in the Kimberley Rock in Australia, or my God, some Neolithic things in Ireland, and amazing stuff in Eastern Europe. It's pretty compelling. There's pretty compelling evidence that we have been involved with different types of beings for millennia, since our very beginnings. And I think that I think they view us as cousins or relatives. I think some of the beings feel like they have responsibility for us. Some beings are not that interested in us. They're just blasé. They're not really that interested. But I think that we have genetic connections already in our genome, which makes all of this stuff kind of possible. Now, I'm not talking about what the Greys were doing. They were definitely splicing genes. God knows what they were doing. Now, when I've had clients describe to me what these children look like when they bring them to them, it's usually some of them look so human that you would never know, but they're kind of delicate. They're kind of fine boned. They're kind of delicate. And then some of the children have maybe no hair, or some will have only some hair, or they will have very profoundly elongated eyes with the large irises in the way that we have heard these things described. So, uh, and as I understand it, when I ask questions, because that's what I'm doing with these lovely people all the time, I'm trying to get at truths. I was told that some of the children are raised so that they just participate in the human world,
Mhm.
and others are not able to leave the ship for um, what would the reason? Atmospheric reasons. I don't know why that is, but some of them have to stay on the ship. They
Really?
can't go down. Yeah, that I know. They have the balance is too much ET DNA and not quite enough human to be able to survive on our Earth. And
Interesting.
yet it's very rare to see any kind of incident on a craft or whatever where everybody isn't appearing to breathe the same air. All the species and the humans. haven't really heard about. I have heard about the atmosphere feeling thick or thicker, if that makes any sense, almost like a humidity. I've heard that, but I have never heard of any special um, breathing apparatus that is worn either by the ETs or the humans from our planet.
Interesting.
Hybridization is something that has taken a deep emotional toll on these people that lived through those brutal types of procedures back in the day. Um, and because they immediately, some of these people never had children in this life, or they are a parent, and being a parent, that parent stuff turns on right away.
Yeah.
And I know that they have to almost sometimes forcibly take the children away. And I had a guy he was a judge, by the way, I think a Superior Court judge, and he was sobbing in my chair, over the grief of having these children that he just got to see taken away from him. So this was a horrible program, uh, any kind of way that you wish to look at it. These people had sleeping disorders because they were always being taken at night. It was terrible, absolutely terrible. And the fact that it was allowed for the sake of greed, for the sake of technology, people suffered, and they suffered a lot. So it's uh it's a very complex issue, but I feel very clear in saying that this type of experience is thankfully very rare
Okay.
um, in our present time. Those aren't the kinds of experiences people seem to be having.
So
Mm.
how do you reconcile this then, Lesley? How do your clients take and morph this into a collaborative process? From how do they go from being taken to make this a
Hmm.
collaboration between alien and human?
Okay. All right. Well, very often when we get in there, Tim, when I say I take someone back to their first encounter and maybe they're three or something, then they can see these things as they really happened. Then it's not so scary because little children, even the dreams you have or the things you think, they're distorted. They're not accurate usually. So having the individual go back and move through different experiences, particularly ones that may have disturbed them, for which they have partial memory. Um, what we're doing is we're shining the light. We're shining the light on the truth, and invariably, it's not it's that is a relieving thing. It's not a traumatic thing because um, what that person thought as a little child is not what their memory has stored. And we get accuracy, from that. The hypnosis process happens in the deep amygdala. We get a lot of accuracy with that. But also, I would say that it's very possible after working with someone and working through their episodes. And one thing I want your listeners to really understand. I am against fear. Fear is the killer. Fear in our lives. Fear is terrible. We don't want it. So we have techniques in hypnotherapy where, as we watch the client, and that's what I'm doing, I'm observing with an eagle eye, and we're looking for respiration, we're looking for circulation, we're looking for all kinds of signs. And if that person begins to experience any distress, I mean, even a facial tic, any distress whatsoever about what they're recalling, I immediately turn them into an observer. Then I have them floating up at the top of the ceiling and looking down on the events, and they are able to process the events without involving any negative emotions.
Ah,
So that's a amazing thing about the human brain that we can actually do that. Now, it's a kind of desensitization, of course, but we used to think, or not me personally, but at the turn of the last century, if someone had a phobia or fear, they used to feel that that person had to be exposed physically to that same fear again and again and again until they finally had no reactivity left. Hence, the snake pit in the old mental hospitals, right?
right.
Oh God. But what what is actually the case is there is no need ever to re-experience the trauma because the experience can be understood and processed and incorporated. So what I am doing really is helping, assisting these dear people who incorporate this aspect of their lives, this specialness, this aspect of their lives back into their psyche, and without fear, without shame, with complete access to their memories, and also empower them. Because the thing is, a lot of my people are involved now in what I would almost have to call kind of a channeling exercise. They are certainly able to communicate with the beings that they are engaging with in real time. Um, so that's a very fascinating kind of development and it's a fascinating kind of collaboration that now these people are capable of doing. So truth truth is the healer. No matter how bad it is, looking at the truth, accepting it, and this is true in all psychotherapy, truth will heal. But it's just how it's shown to that person. And I do everything with compassion. And no one is ever, I will never allow anyone to experience a traumatic episode when I'm working with them. So that's one thing I did want to point out.
Right.
I can't speak for other people who do this work. Some people, I can't speak for everybody because, I was fortunate enough, blessed to learn all of my regression techniques from Dr. Georgina Cannon, who is a very major, major figure in the field of regression therapy. And so everything that I do is an adaptation of her techniques.
Okay. Okay.
So, and it's all about the well-being and the safety and the feelings of security and trust with the patient.
Excellent. Excellent. Um, got a few minutes left here in the program. I wanted to get to the subject of implants. Have you had clients who have had implants in the
Oh,
past? And if so, was it dangerous to them to have had them implanted? Have they gone through personal injury because of it? Have they eventually had to have them out? And have you been witness to this? Have you had any interesting stories about that?
well, I have one kind of close personal experience with that, but I will say that as far as we know, there are really two different types of implants that people receive depending on what their experience is. One it is of military origin, and we're not quite sure what that's designed to do. They're not tracking devices because every being on the planet has their own individual brain signature. And once you know that, you can just key into it. They can find anybody they want. They
Mhm.
don't need a little, metal nodule or whatever it is. Now, the other types of implants are willingly accepted by the experiencers. And what they are is, I suppose, the closest way to describe that is they're kind of a step up transformer for increased psychic ability and awareness, that kind of thing. So
Oh,
the ETs will help or assist, the benevolent ones will help or assist certain clients, if they want to. For instance, one of my longtime clients is a very, very busy remote viewer, and he attributes part of that with desiring to do that kind of work and being given a little bit of technological help. Now, many of those types of implants just dissolve when they are done working, and they're there not forever, but for a short time. And I have also heard about some of these implants working on just the etheric body or the astral body and not the physical body. So that's another whole aspect of stuff that's pretty far out. Now, my personal experience was I was shooting a television show that it was a pilot. It never actually happened, but the guy that created it went on to Gaia to do a bunch of stuff over there. So
Okay.
this was this was his little project. So he was wanted very much to find somebody with an implant, and he did somehow. He found a young girl. She and her brother and the mother had been as stationed up on the dew line. Again, this is a Canadian situation. The
Mhm.
girl's from Montreal, I believe. And so finally, Sid finally found a doctor, a surgeon, who would remove this implant. Now it was right on her, like on her shoulder, right there, and it was magnetic. Like you could attach things to the arm and they would just hang there.
Oh my God.
So whatever was in there had metals and was magnetized. Yeah. So so the thing was removed up in Montreal, and I saw pictures of it when it came out, and it looked like a little, a tiny little barbell, except one side was a slightly smaller ball than the other end.
Hmm.
Now, it was also covered in some, as one would, some fascia and some material, because it had been, I think it had moved, I think it had grown out, to the point was really bothering her. So then he had it, analyzed, with a kind of, some kind of mass spectrometer. And indeed, there were elements there that were not identifiable.
Interesting.
So it's a little mysterious.
Very
So,
much.
yeah, a little mysterious. But in that situation, everything was done medically and by the book. I think it was at the head of the university science department in Montreal did the analysis, I believe. And so now I know when Dr. Lear, the great Dr. Lear, who was the leading guy in dealing with these implants, I mean, he reported that they had EMF emanations. In other words, you could put a little EMF meter, but they were all signal. They had like, I think this had to be the U.S. Army, but there were radio signals coming out. Sometimes when they were exposed to air, when he removed them, they dissolved immediately.
Huh.
Sometimes they moved around the body in kind of a snake-like way, and it was very difficult to get them out. And
Really?
he actually pulled one out, and this is all information you can see on YouTube.
Yeah.
Dr. Roger Lear, one of them looked like a little, like a centipede, so you've seen some of
Oh,
this stuff.
yeah.
So I have never known anyone who experienced anything like that, but I have known people who have sworn that they have an implant, it's not bothering them, and it's working for them, and it's going to dissolve. So there you have it. You know all that I know.
Okay.
So, but it seems feasible that with technology, they could be using some type of device to stimulate maybe the pineal gland. Who knows?
Right. Right.
It's not impossible.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
I
Uh,
mean, we have, you know, patches that leak stuff into our system.
yes.
So
Yeah.
why not an implant of some sort?
Exactly. Exactly. Last question here before we wrap up here, Lesley. So we've got people who have had this resulting trauma, or they're trying to get through their day, and trying to process what it is that they've gone
Yes.
through here with a different uh, race of an existing alien, and and
Mhm.
they want to get back to being happy. Let's face it. They want to
Mhm.
function in society. They want to get through their day. They want to be a normal human being. Uh,
Yeah,
how do we get them from point A to point B? How do
yeah.
we eventually get them to be a happy, functional, aware humanoid on this planet?
Well, they do. They do. Once we start reducing the trauma they've been carrying, once they feel accepted, and then I often encourage people to, listen to shows like yours, and if or participate, join a group, join MUFON, where they will meet many people who are like them. So they often begin to feel, part of a community as well. I think one of the biggest problems every experiencer has to deal with is insomnia, because it begins with them being fearful of being taken during the night to the point where they're hyper vigilant and they just cannot sleep. So one of the ways that I have helped with this is I asked one of my clients to make a deal with them, to explain to them about sleep, about how we need it. We need 8 hours. It might seem very bizarre to them. They may not understand our sleep cycles, and also make a deal with them that you'll go anywhere with them on the weekend and participate in whatever projects you're doing. But Monday through Friday, you have to have decent sleep with no interruptions. And it worked.
Really? Huh. I suppose
Yeah, it
negotiation is the
worked.
best way, right?
Just like that in my chair. Yes, yes, just in his chair. You see, this is not God. These are beings who are imperfect like we are. How could they possibly understand everything about us and our sleep schedules and REM sleep? How could they possibly know everything? That we really can't be interrupted and have our sleep disrupted over a long period of time, or we lose our minds. So getting the sleep back online is always a priority. And thus far, I've managed to have great success with that. Thank God.
There you go. There you go. I that's a great way to start. I mean, a good night's sleep is always a great way to start. That's for sure. And being able to
It
negotiate
is.
and
It
and
is.
yeah, and being able to have a little
Yeah.
bit of peace and quiet, I think is a good way to get things on the right track.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
We are not powerless. We are primarily collaborators in trying to lift up our fellow humans into a more civilized, kinder, better way of being, and it's possible.
There you go. There you go. You have a book out there called Intersection, A True Story of Extraterrestrial Contact. We'll have a link to it in the description of this program so people can go out and learn more about you, as well
Oh,
as
great.
a link to the website so people can get to know you as well. Uh, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, I want to thank you so much for being on
That's
the program.
cool.
Yeah,
Thank you, Tim. It was such a pleasure. I wish I was there in Minneapolis with you right now. We could saunter on down to the Loon Saloon. That's what I wish.
absolutely.
But maybe sometime, maybe there will be a big event, ufology event in Minneapolis, and I'll be there. If you're running it, I'll be there.
I'll buy the first Loom burger. How's that sound?
That's you.
Hey, I love the burger at the Loon Cafe. So that you got a deal there. So
I know. I know. It's really good.
that's a deal there. So
Okay, man. Well, thank you, Tim. That's a deal. You got it.
you got
You
it.
take care, and thank you so much again. And I look forward to chat. We didn't even talk about reincarnation, but I got some wild stuff there too.
That's
We can
right.
get
Well,
into that another time.
we'll have you back on, Lesley, most definitely. Thank you so much, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll see you next time right here on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.
For more audio and video archives of the show, entertaining content, and cool swag, check out darknessradioshow.com. Have a great day. Now go out and be a light in someone's darkness.